The burrow, usually peaceful under the cover of night, was anything but that tonight. The air was filled with quiet whispers and stifled laughter as Fred and George Weasley snuck into their younger brother's room. Their latest scheme, cooked up after hours of plotting, involved Ron's favorite toy, a small, worn-out teddy bear that he kept hidden under his pillow, too embarrassed to show it off in front of anyone. Fred grinned in the darkness, pulling out his wand ready. George nodded, eyes gleaming mischievously. "This'll give him a proper fright." With a swift flick of Fred's wand, the harmless teddy bear morphed. In its place was a massive, hairy spider, its legs twitching slightly in the dim moonlight that filtered through Ron's window. It looked disturbingly real, from the beady, glassy eyes to the long, menacing fangs. Fred and George shared a wicked grin before slipping out of the room and silently shutting the door. Moments passed, and the twins held their breath just outside the door, waiting. Then it happened. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house. Ron's voice, high-pitched with terror, pierced the stillness. "Mom, spider! There's a spider!" Fred and George couldn't hold back anymore. They collapsed into fits of laughter as they heard the heavy thuds of footsteps rushing up the stairs. Ron stumbled out of his room, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. "What is it, dear?" Molly Weasley's concerned voice called as she rushed up the stairs, Ginny in tow, her nightgown billowing around her. It was on my bed," Ron gasped, pointing back into his room, his hands shaking. "Huge spider. Right there." Fred and George exchanged a glance and barely suppressed their snickers as their mother barged into Ron's room, wand at the ready. She looked around, then spotted the transfigured spider, now resting innocently on the bed. With a flick of her wand, it reverted back into the shabby little teddy bear. Molly turned slowly toward Fred and George, her eyes narrowed. "Fred. George, what in Merlin's name were you thinking?" Mrs. Weasley roared. Her voice shook the burrow, and both twins froze under her glare. "That's enough pranking for a week. You've terrified your brother." "But Mum, it was just..." Fred began, only to be silenced by her raised hand. "Go to bed now, and you'll be doing extra chores tomorrow to make up for this, understood?" She glared at them until they both muttered their apologies and slunk back to their room. Mrs. Weasley then sighed, turning back to Ron, who was still trembling in his bed. "Oh, Ronald, dear, it's just your old bear." Her voice softened as she gently sat on the edge of his bed. "The twins. They just don't know when to stop sometimes, but you're all right now, see?" Even as Mrs. Weasley comforted him, Ron felt the heavy weight of humiliation settle in his chest. His own brother's always pulling pranks, always making him feel like the odd one out. He glanced toward the spot next to him where Edward sat silently, his arms crossed, unimpressed by the situation. "See? They treat you like the run of the litter." Edward muttered, his voice dark and bitter. "A joke to them, a target for their pranks, but I bet they wouldn't dare try pulling that kind of shite on Bill or Charlie, would they?" The next morning at breakfast, the atmosphere was tense. Fred and George were notably quiet, casting wary glances at their mother, who was still fuming as she served the morning porridge. Ron, though relieved that the spider was gone, barely touched his food, his eyes shadowed with a mixture of frustration and lingering fear. "You all right, Ron?" his father Arthur Weasley asked gently, noticing his son's downcast expression. Ron nodded wordlessly but kept his eyes down, avoiding everyone's gaze. Edward, though invisible to the rest of the family, sat across from him at the breakfast table, arms crossed and leaning forward with an amused grin. "They always get away with it, don't they?" Edward's voice was casual, but there was an underlying edge to it. "It's the same every time. Fred and George get a scolding, maybe a tap on the wrist, but in the end no one ever really cares how much they humiliate you." Ron bit his lip. Ed was right. No matter what his brothers did, they were always forgiven, always excused. Ron, on the other hand, was left to deal with the aftermath of their so-called fun. After a tense breakfast, Molly announced that they would be going to Diagon Alley to buy some new things for Percy since he made it his head boy. "And I thought we might pick up something nice for Ginny too," she added with a soft, affectionate smile toward her youngest child. Ron felt his heart sink at her words. Of course, Ginny. It was always Ginny. His mother doted on her like she was the center of the world, buying her little treats and trinkets whenever they could afford it, while he seemed to blend into the background, his own wants and needs. Forgotten. Edward leaned in closer, his voice a whisper in Ron's ear. See what I mean? She'll buy something nice for Ginny again, and what do you get, Ron? A pat on the head? Another hand-me-down? Another excuse on why you can't get anything either, T. Ron clenched his fists under the table, his anger simmering just beneath his skin. As they all finished their food and stepped through the fireplace to Diagon Alley, Ron's heart felt heavy. He watched his mother fuss over Ginny, holding her hand as they walked through the busy streets while his brothers chatted and laughed amongst themselves. He felt forgotten. Then that feeling of numbness crawled up after, like it always did. Cheer up. Maybe we won't really need them once we're out of Hogwarts, Edward said, appearing by his left. Ron shook his head. Yeah, you're right, he replied. The day was then spent with Molly getting Percy some new things, along with a personal pet owl that Percy affectionately named Hermes. The twins went over to a Zonko shop while he was stuck watching as his mom bought something for Ginny. He could have tried to ask for something as well, but he already knew what the answer would be, so there was simply no point. Ron left after asking permission to hang out at the Leaky Cauldron, but in truth, he went over to the Gringotts Bank, exchanging the muggle money he earned. He now had 15 gallons and 5 sickles. That was enough money to get 10 new robes, a better broom, and a wand of his own, but that would of course cause his mom to get suspicious, so he had a new vault open, depositing 8 gallons and the 5 sickles inside of it. He kept 7 to at least get himself a brand new wand from Ollivander's that he could keep hidden in his pocket while pretending to use Charlie's old one. The old wand maker was surprised to see a Weasley. It had been a long time since a member of the family received their wand from him. It took 20 wands until one of them matched with him, 13.5 inches, blackthorn wood, with a thestral tail hair core, very flexible. The wand keeper was surprised, deeming it a curious thing, since it's not often a wizard had a wand with a core that associated with a creature of death. Ron was quick to pay the man, wanting to get away from him, since he was getting a bit creeped out. Later that day, when they came home, Percy came by his room with a cage containing his old pet rat Scabbers. Thought you might want him, Percy said, setting the cage down with a clunk. His tone was uptight and uncaring, as if giving Ron a hand-me-down was just another chore to tick off his list. He's not much good anymore, but, well, I figured you could use some company. Ron looked up, blinking. Thanks, he muttered automatically, even as a bitter taste filled his mouth. Percy didn't stick around to chat. He just gave a nod and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Edward sat perched on the windowsill now, one foot swinging lazily. He clapped his hands together once, slow and mocking. There you go, mate. Another gift from the family, he sneered. The scraps. Always the scraps. Ron glanced at the rat Scabbers as it gave a pathetic twitch of his ear, but otherwise looked half dead. You're not angry enough, Edward said casually. Ron frowned. What's the point? Even if I got mad, nothing would change. Edward leaned forward, eyes flashing. That's the problem. You sit and take it. You keep swallowing it down. You know what happens to people who keep swallowing everything they're fed. He waited a beat, then snarled. They rot from the inside out. Ron flinched, his fingers curled into fists without meaning to. Aren't I already rotting, though? He couldn't help but inwardly think with a slight laugh. It doesn't matter, Edward. We've already got a plan to leave this place anyway, so let's just try and get some sleep. We're going to Hogwarts early tomorrow. Ron replied, laying down on his bed while Edward scoffed. Come on, Ronnie, you and I know full well that it's going to be a long night before you ever get a good night's sleep. Edward was right like always. Ron had developed what the Muggles called insomnia, a sleeping disorder that made it hard to sleep during the night. The only reason he knew that was because of Edward always telling him to go out into the nearby settlement, see what made them different from the rest of the wizarding world. End of chapter 2.